Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 16 of Under Review and our fourth interview episode. Jeremy Goldstein along with Ethan Birch. Today, we have a very special guest to kick off our return to YouTube. We have SiriusXM NFL's Bruce Murray. Bruce, how is life treating you?
Life is treating me well, although I will share some disappointment. I heard this is episode 16, so you had 15 before me. That really is upsetting to me.
Well, to make you feel better, only 3 other guests came on before you.
Okay.
Not 15.
Now I feel a lot better. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's not terrible. But so we'll start off with how you got started in sports broadcasting. How old were you when sports broadcasting came to mind as like a career? Like, when was it like, wow, I want to talk about football for a job?
So I'm going to tell you about things that went on in my life, and you're going to hear words that you've probably never heard in your life. And if you haven't, you can certainly ask for an explanation, and then I will tell you what they were. But, when I was young, probably 15 or 16 years old, I was always somewhat of an outgoing person, whatever you want to call it. And I was trying out for the high school basketball team. And during my tryouts, I tore the ligaments in my ankle. So I could not play basketball for the high school basketball team. And they said, well, do you want to be the announcer? The in-gym, PA announcer, with, basket by Kevin Nolan. And I said, sure, I'll do that. It was all my friends that were playing. And I actually enjoyed it. And then for a birthday, my grandfather got me what was the first Sony Betamax. Now I say that. You guys have any idea what a Betamax is?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No.
Do you know what a VCR is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the Betamax was the precursor to VCRs. It was actually Sony's version of it, different size tape, the whole thing. But my grandfather got me one, and there was an external microphone. And I used to watch Monday Night Football games and put the microphone in. And with my buddies, we would actually like overdub the game. Like I would play the announcer, they would play the analyst, and we would just have fun with it. So it was really like at the beginning of high school that I started to have this passion. And then I went to college, and my sister was actually in the same university that I went to. She was a senior and I was a freshman. She was working at the college radio station. And I went down to visit her, and this is how it all began. I'm visiting her, and she goes, our news guy didn't show up. Do you want to do the news? And I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, just rip this copy. There was what we called the Associated Press, where you actually had a typewriter, and it would spit out news stories. And I ripped it off, and I just did the news. And I was like, well, that was fun. She goes, well, there's an organizational meeting. Why don't you just come? And I went to the meeting, and I started, in college radio. By the time I was a junior, I was doing Tulane football and basketball games on the radio. And then when I got out of college, I, like everybody else, spent the better part of my first year out of school trying to get my first job. But that's where it started.
Yeah, and you obviously mentioned in that answer that you did graduate from Tulane University and you did broadcast football over there. Was that your favorite sport to do? Because obviously you do a radio show surrounding the NFL now. Was football always your passion in regards to talking about sports?
I think so. And I'm not 100% sure why. I did baseball and basketball and all the sports at Tulane. I found it the most enjoyable to do. I actually found baseball to be the toughest to do because there's a different rhythm to it. Basketball and football, where you're just calling what you see and letting the analyst fill in what goes on around it, I always found to be far easier to do. And I didn't do a lot of baseball because, baseball on college radio wasn't exactly all that popular. But I don't know specifically. Like, the truth is, my favorite sport growing up was hockey. My passion for professional sports today is also hockey. I have a son that's a hockey player. We watch the Islanders games. Like, I remember it like I'm 16. Like, I have that same nervous energy that comes with it. I'm a huge Giants fan. I think you're a huge Giants fan, right,
We
Jeremy?
both are over here.
We
We
both
talk
are.
a
You
lot
both
about
are.
we
Yeah,
talk a lot about the Giants over here.
Yeah, I mean, my son, it's your typical Giants fan. Daniel Jones is either a franchise quarterback or the Giants need to draft a quarterback every week.
That's our
Yeah,
discussion
it's
every single week.
exactly.
That's our
every
discussion
week.
every single week.
Right. So he can't really relate, to the fact that, because I grew up that way. And it's not that I don't have the passion for the Giants anymore, but being in the sport, I'm a little more measured. I don't have the highs and lows that you'd normally have. So I still love hockey. But yeah, I think that I always had a great love for football, and, it's landed me at NFL radio.
Joe Buck wrote a book, and I actually read it. I know Jeremy read it too. And he was talking about how when he grew up as a Cardinals fan, that he would get so upset when they lost when his dad brought him to the game, but then he would see them just hanging out in the locker room and just like acting as if normal. And he like lost the passion as a fan. Didn't lose like loving the Cardinals, but he kind of just lost that passion of like, oh, like it's okay if they don't lose. They're just hanging out in the locker room having fun after Lee Smith gave a walk-off 2-run homer and he's hanging out with his friends. So like, I feel like that's almost like the same thing.
Well, and I'll tell you, it's funny you bring that up because fans want their athletes to hurt as much as they do.
Oh,
they really do. Like they don't understand. The great story is, I don't know if you guys remember when the New England Patriots lost to the New York Giants in the Super Bowl, and Rob Gronkowski, who was playing on an injured leg, was seen after the game dancing at some party, and fans were irate. And I remember going on the radio the next day, having to field phone calls from fans. How could he do that? He doesn't care. And I said, you don't understand the mind of the professional athlete. They prepare as hard as they can. They want to win at every bit, not every bit as much, 10 times more than we do. But once it's over and they've done all that they can, the result speaks for itself and they learn how to move on. Some guys would, Tom Brady may be the kind of guy that pulls the shades and sits in a dark room for a month and can't get over it. Gronkowski wasn't that guy. And fans were upset because he wasn't as upset as they were. But that doesn't mean he didn't try as hard as he possibly could. And fans just can't relate to that. I'm with Joe Buck. Athletes themselves, they want to win and it hurts to lose. But once they lose, because they're going to lose a lot in their lives, they learn to move on and enjoy the other parts of their lives.
Well, would you say this applies to Sean McVay? Because I remember watching the Patriots-Rams Thursday Night Football game a couple of weeks ago, and Sean McVay's big narrative going into that game was, I'm not over the Patriots Super Bowl loss. Do you think he was dejected at going home after that game and he really didn't get over it for a while? Or did he get over it? He just wanted revenge on the Patriots that night?
No, first of all, I do believe that all people are built differently. Now, I also believe that coaches have a different mindset than players do. Completely different mindset. I'm not saying that there aren't players who have, first of all, no player gets over a loss. I will tell you that. You talk to enough athletes and what you learn about them is this. I work with Brett Favre once a week. Okay. You ask Brett Favre for the things that he remembers most from playing, he's going to respond first with the losses, then before the wins. The loss to the Broncos in the Super Bowl. It's amazing how losses stay with athletes more than the wins do, because those are the ones that hurt more. They measure the hurt more than they can measure the joy that comes with that victory. So I don't think they ever actually get over it. But, a guy like McVay, who's so analytical and so thoughtful, he's got a chance to go over everything that he did, preparation, the calls that he made in the game. A player, he goes out and executes. And if it doesn't work, he, again, tried his best. McVay's probably spending time going, I should have done this on third down, or I should have prepared this way leading up to it. What am I going to do differently next time? So I'm not saying they're completely different. There are certainly players that will carry that forward. But I think coaches, internalize things very differently than players do.
Without a doubt. And yeah, Rob Gronkowski's always been like that kind of party-ish guy anyway. So I feel like you almost expect that out of somewhat of him. I wasn't really shocked when I saw that, or you just said that right now. But moving back towards your career, so you said that you went to Tulane University, you called Green Wave basketball and football games from 1983 to 1985. First of all, you said you did that. Excuse me. You said that you didn't go to school for broadcasting right away. Right. Does that come to a shock with you? Because that seems interesting. And how did you value your time in Tulane?
Well, first of all, I didn't go to school for broadcasting. As a matter of fact, Tulane did not have a communications program. The only thing you could do down at Tulane that would get you involved in broadcast was to do the radio station, which was a university club at the time. I went down to school, not really sure what I wanted to do. I always thought maybe I would, pursue the world of business. But then I fell in love with this. And even when I got out of school, and I went to work in a family business for a year, it was only to kind of bridge the gap while I was looking for a job. I knew that wasn't my passion. My dad knew it wasn't my passion. My grandfather, who was at the business, knew it wasn't my passion. And they wanted me to go out and look. And I was actually working during the day and interning at night. I would leave work with my father, and I would go to New York Sports Nightly, which was then the New York Mets channel, to work from like 7 to 11:30, and then go home and go to bed and get up and do it again. But going back to the question about Tulane, it's funny. People say, well, you're in a fraternity. And I say, no, the radio station became my fraternity. Mm-hmm. My time was valued. And I actually went through I was the DJ. I was the classic story of the college radio station. Started as a news guy, became a DJ, became the sports director. And in my senior year, I was actually the general manager of WTOL. And it took most of my free time. Now, the best part about it was that when you were the head of one of the campus outlets, whether it was the newspaper, you got a free parking spot on campus. And parking on campus at Tulane was impossible. So that was like gold. My friends were like, can you drive me to campus? And I'm like, sure. And I could park right in front of the university center. So that was like the big bonus as like a college senior. I had my own parking spot. But that consumed most of my time. And that became my fraternity. There was an office down in the basement of the university center with the old records and the studios. And we would just go down there and hang out on the couches. And, you know, I learned a lot without knowing at the time what I was learning. But that's where I spent most of my time. And I didn't know at the time how much I would value it now, but even now, it's one of the greatest experiences I've ever had in my life, learning on my own to do all of that at the university level.
So this next question I'm going to ask you is something I've also asked our three previous guests, in Rich Hollenberg, Gary Apple, and Ed Cohen. I'm interested to see what you have to say because you were not a communications or broadcasting major. How did you approach getting your first job out of school, and how difficult was it? Because this is something I know Ethan and I talk about all the time, and it's a popular topic amongst Ithaca sports media and TVR majors.
Well, I think it depends on what you want your first job to be. I wanted my first job to be on the air. And when I got out of school, I made a TV tape. And I took the TV tape and I literally sent it. Times have changed so dramatically. Now you can go online and find things. Back then, there was a magazine called Broadcast Magazine, and it basically listed all the TV outlets around the country. I literally sent this tape out to probably 200 of them. And I remember getting some responses. I sent it out to some TV stations in San Jose, and I got back letters that said, "We really appreciate your tape. You're actually qualified, but we're all Spanish speaking." And I was like, oh, well, that's a problem. I had no idea who I was sending the tape to. So it was hard at the beginning. And then I was out of school now for a year, and I realized my path may not be to get a job on the air unless I was willing to go to a small radio station outside the New York City area, which I was. But it became harder and harder to find where those opportunities would be. My first job, you'd be shocked, it came at WFAN. I'm sure you guys are familiar with WFAN.
Of course.
First all sports radio station in the country. So I was interning. I was meeting people as often as I could. You get introduced to this person. And I would suggest to anybody, no matter how valueless you think meeting somebody may be, meet them, take their number, stay in touch. You never know what's going to come out of it. 99% of them are going to be a waste of time. That 1% is going to be like, talk to this guy. He may be able to help you out. That's how you land your first job. So I knew somebody that knew the program director at the sister station for what was going to be WFAN. They said, hey, they're putting together this sports radio station. Go talk to this guy. They're hiring right now. I get on the train. I go out to Astoria, Queens, and I walk into this guy's office. I kid you not. He's, a 30-something-year-old guy looking down at his desk at a bunch of papers. I sit down in the chair next to him. He doesn't look up at me. He says to me, I have one job. It's working overnights. It pays $200 a week. Do you want it or not? And I was like, I guess, sure. What's the job? And he goes, don't worry, just be here for a meeting on Wednesday. I said, okay. He never looked up. I'm telling you, I could have sent you guys in. You guys would have had the job because he didn't know what I looked like. I get on the train. Wow. I go back into the city. I said, Dad, I think I have a job. I have to start next Wednesday. And he said, what is it? I said, it's an all sports radio station, which again, now we're so used to it. It's in every market.
Yeah, of course.
Exist. And my dad said, yeah, that'll last about a week. You'll be back here. This was in July. He said, you'll be back here in September. I was like, all right. And I took the job, and it was working overnights. Basically, taking in scores from the West Coast. I was not on the air. I was what they called a PA, a production assistant. I was writing scores. I was taking in racing results. I was taking in fishing information for the guys in the morning. This is what we did. We had no idea what we were doing. Sometimes I was running out to get food for the overnight host, who then was a guy named Steve Summers. The producer, Steve? Yeah, the schmoozer. So 3 months into being a PA, Steve Summers didn't like his producer, who they ended up firing. They asked me if I wanted to be the producer, which producing overnights was, trust me, it sounds more glamorous. It was basically picking up the phone and go, hi, what's your name? Where you calling from? Mm-hmm. Oh, Jeremy from New York. Hang on, you'll be fifth or something. That was producing overnights back then. And so I did that for about a year, got another job real producing, booking guests and actually producing a radio show during the day. And then I left to go work at a TV station in Washington, also in production. And then I left that job to go up to ESPN up in Bristol, Connecticut when they were starting radio. I was not pursuing a job on the air at the time. I knew that's what I wanted to do when I got out, but now I was on this career path of being behind the scenes. And I was up at ESPN, and I didn't like living in Bristol, Connecticut. And I get a call from the guys I worked with at WFAN who knew me, that was starting the all sports radio station in Washington, D.C. And they said, listen, we're launching this radio station. We kind of remember you. You used to go on the air with Steve Summers overnight, did some little bits with him. Do you want to come down and host overnights? And I said, sure. I just wanted to get out of Bristol, Connecticut. I'm 28 years old. It was not a place for a single guy to be living. I got in a car. I drove to Washington, D.C. I started hosting overnights, and that's how I got my first on-air job. And I was not pursuing that. It just came to me almost by accident.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's actually a pretty incredible story. So you started at 28. What were you doing as soon as you got out of college, like at that time?
Well, no, I got my first job at WFN. I was 25. So I worked in the family business for a couple of years. My first on-air job was when I was 29.
Oh, my bad. Okay.
So 25, I get my first job at I was 24 when I got the job at WFAN. And then the stops in between before I got back to Washington for a second time at 28.
So obviously now you're on Sirius, and that's where you have your big show. Talk about how that experience started, and maybe give us a favorite moment from your time at Sirius.
Well, so there's a stop in between. I'm in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And it's actually where I met my wife. We were working at the same radio station. And believe it or not, we were both, I wasn't, when you're on the air, you're not fired. Your contract expires. When you're off the air, you get fired. And we were both let go the same day. The radio station was struggling and had been bought by somebody else. They called me and they said, we're not renewing your contract. I was going to be up in March of 1996, and my wife had been fired. So a guy that I worked with in Washington had moved to Chicago to launch an all sports network called Sporting News Radio. And he said, you want to come out here and host with your former partner? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. But my contract hadn't expired. So I was actually working in DC, where I was, at that time, I was finishing up my career. I was actually I was doing a nightly talk show from 7 to midnight, but I was also the host of all the Bullets programming. Now the Washington Wizards. They were the Washington Bullets then. I did their pregame show, their postgame show. I did their coaches show. So I had to wait until the end of the season, but I had gotten the job in Chicago. So I was actually working in Washington, and then on the weekends, getting on a plane, flying to Chicago to do Saturdays and Sundays in Chicago. So I was working both jobs at the same time, and I had to do that for a period of 6 months. My wife moved out with me to Chicago, and one of the guys that I worked with at WFAN, a guy named Steve Cohen, had become the vice president of sports at Sirius. And we had always been friends. And he said, when are you coming back? I've got a job for you at Sirius. And I said, I'm not coming back. I stayed in Chicago for 10 years. My 3 kids were born there, one of whom you know, Max. Yeah. And then Sporting News Radio was being relocated to Los Angeles. And my wife was always like, I thought we were going back to the East Coast at some point. And I said, let me reach out to Steve. It was right when Christopher Mad Dog Russo was coming to Sirius. Chris and I had known each other from WFAN, and he said, I want you to be part of the new radio station. So I didn't start on NFL radio at Sirius. I worked my first 5 years. My first contract was to work on Mad Dog Sports Radio as Christopher Mad Dog Russo's lead-in. And then back in 2011, my contract was up, and there was some shuffling going on, and I wanted to go to NFL radio, and that's when I went over to NFL radio. I don't know that there's a specific moment necessarily that stands out. People ask, and, sometimes you take things for granted, but, I've had a chance to host Bill Parcells' radio show. I've hosted Troy Aikman's radio show. I now host Brett Favre's radio show on a weekly basis. I think when you reflect on things like that, you realize how fortunate you are to sit around with some of the greatest players ever and get to know them intimately. And, to hear their stories off the air as much as you do on the air, it's nothing I would trade anything for.
It's funny. I was just about to bring that up, that you co-host with Troy Aikman, or you host his show and Bill Parcells. Like, just putting in perspective, Troy Aikman works with Joe Buck on national television every single week. Like, that is just something surreal. Can you explain that experience? Like just hearing those words?
Well, I'll say this. It started with Bill Parcells. So I worked with Bill Parcells when I was in Chicago, and this was probably about 2000. I'm going to say 2011. And I will tell you, I was with him the day he took the job to coach the Dallas Cowboys.
Really?
And I'll tell you a little story about that one in a second. But I was in my 30s, and they asked me if I would host his show, and I said, sure. I would. I grew up a Giants fan. I'm a Bill Parcells fan. And they said, all right, we're going to fly to New Jersey to meet him. We're going to do some photo shoots at the Meadowlands. And I remember getting on the plane, and I was scared to death. I was totally intimidated. I'm like, I'm going to be sitting down with Bill Parcells. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? And, he's got that reputation of being gruff and tough. Man couldn't be nicer. Really, was so respectful of the role that I was going to play in the show that made me feel so comfortable. And so that in itself, because everybody always says, boy, was he tough? Was he always mad at you? And I said, he couldn't be better. He had a sense of humor. I could have fun with him. He would have fun with me. And it was really a great experience. And I remember being with him. We had done the show for 2 years, and he told me that he was going to meet Jerry Jones in New Jersey. He was about to take the Dallas Cowboys job. And he said, but you can't tell anybody. And I think I won his respect because I didn't break any news. I didn't violate any trust. And then I said, hey, Bill, listen, once you're back coaching, I'd love to have you on my radio show. Will you come on with me? And he goes, no, you're OOT. And I said, well, what does that mean? He goes, you're one of them. And by them, he meant the media. And he never came on my radio show. Now, after he retired, we would talk and we would text and we were friends. But when he became the coach, I would shoot him a text and be like, no, I'm not coming on with you. He was a man of his word. I became one of them. And so he left, and they hired Troy Aikman to fill that show. And Troy was young in his broadcasting career, and we became very friendly. And it's extraordinary to see what he's become because he is the face of Fox with Joe Buck. But it was great. I guess I took it for granted because I didn't sit back and go, wow, Troy Aikman, because I had already worked with Bill Parcells. But it was just another guy that I could learn from differently, a different perspective on the way the game was played and how differently you learn about it than the fans do. We always think, oh, why did he do this? Why did he do? We're always criticizing. And then you learn it from the guy that actually put on the shoulder pads and the helmet, and you get a completely different education.
So I know currently your show operates Monday through Friday, and then you have the weekends off. Obviously, you're going to be very busy on Sunday as well because you have to prepare for the entire week's worth of content. What's your typical Sunday like? Are you watching the Giants with your son? Are you going to watch Red Zone? Like, what's your plan?
Okay, so it's funny you say you work Monday through Friday. My wife would not say that. She would say you work Sunday through Friday, and Sunday's the worst work day of the week. Where most, and I try to explain to her, I say, most guys don't get paid to do this, and they're still watching football all day. I'm getting
talking
paid
about
to
it,
do it. Right. I'm getting paid to do it. I don't have a choice, but no. So I have in my house, I have basically a viewing room with 8 televisions.
Wow.
So I'm not watching one game. I'm watching all 8 of them. There's rarely only at the beginning of the season pre-buys and at the end of the season post-buys are there ever more than 8 football games on at one time in the time slot. It's usually there's a Thursday night game, a Sunday night game, a Monday night game. Then there's 13 others. So it's usually 8 and 5 or 9 and 4. And obviously during the bye weeks, you'll never have more than 8 games during the early time slot. So I'm watching every game. People always ask, do you watch the Red Zone? And I say, I don't learn anything from the Red Zone, which I know fantasy football players love. And I play fantasy football. My son plays fantasy football. I respect it. But all you do is see the score. You don't know how they got to the 20. You don't know if they sustained a long drive. You don't know if they got a turnover. They'll show that stuff. But I need to watch the games to get a sense of the rhythm of the game. So I watch all 8. I'm sitting in front of those screens from 1 to 7. It is exhausting. Make no mistake. It's not easy to watch 8 games at one time. You're not moving. You're just staring at screens. I take a break after the 7 o'clock games. And then I usually have a bite to eat. And then for the late game, I'll come up to my office, which is where I am now, and I'll watch the late game on a TV that I have in front of me. And I'll start going back and reviewing all the other games on tape, things that I missed, things that I want to see. So I'll almost rewatch half the games by Monday morning. And then Monday morning, I'll get up and start rewatching more stuff that I missed. And, throughout the week, Wednesday, the coach's film goes up. You start watching that to see, things that you want to specify. But it's basically during the football season, it's very busy because it's Sunday watching games all day. During the week, it's rewatching a lot of stuff. And as things come up with guests and or even callers, I'll say, I'm going to go back and rewatch that, usually with the coach's film to see if a quarterback missed an open wide receiver or something like that. So it's just a lot of watching is really what it is during the season. Out of the season, it's more reading and a different kind of preparation.
Yeah, it's honestly incredible to hear that because, all of America is watching, but you're like almost like the next level of watching because like you're watching every single game at once. It's pretty crazy. So you did a training camp tour in 2019. Can you explain what that experience was like? Well,
yeah, just so we do a training camp tour every year. So I've done them now for the last eight or 9 years. And so here's what we do at Sirius NFL Radio. We visit every football team. Now, when people hear that, they go, "You visit every football team?" My show doesn't visit every football team. As a channel, the 5 shows starting in the morning, going through the evening, visit all 32 teams. So my show will visit 6 or 7 teams. So, all the years run together. And of course, this was COVID-19 year. So we didn't have a training camp tour this year. But last year, for instance, training camp tour started in Philly, went to the Jets, went down to New Orleans, to Minnesota, to Green Bay, to Dallas, Miami, and then back home. And sometimes it's city to city to city. Like I remember I started in New York. I drove to Philly, and I'll never forget this. I was supposed to go from Philly to New Orleans, and I got on the bus. I returned my rental car. I got on the bus. I got off the bus. I probably shouldn't be sharing this, but I left my luggage on the bus, and I thought I was either going to miss my flight or I was going to go to New Orleans, where I still had to go to Minnesota and Green Bay without any clothing. And so I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I actually called the rental car company and they got my bag back. I still had like an hour to make the flight, so I got it back. But it's a lot of, it's a lot of stress about flying. Weather can impact you and you don't have a lot of time because you're going back to back to back to back. Some of them are a little easier, like Minnesota to Green Bay, you drive. So you finish your show, you get in a car and you drive to Green Bay. But we visit with every team. And when we do, we basically do our radio shows from the sites that they train at. And the team, because we're partners with the NFL, they're very helpful to us. They'll get us the coach, they'll get us the quarterbacks, they'll get us whatever stars we ask for. They'll get us the general managers. So in Green Bay, it's Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur and, 3 offensive linemen and, Aaron Jones. Minnesota, it's Kirk Cousins and Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman. And I get, the best part of that is the FaceTime you get with the guys. And we generally visit the same cities every year. So you get to know these guys. You're no longer strangers to them. And Aaron Rodgers, he can be tough. But
he's a tough cookie.
What's that?
I said he's a tough cookie sometimes.
He can be tough. You got to win his trust. And, I've seen him enough now over the last 8 years, where he knows me when I walk into the room that he's a lot more comfortable. When I sit down with Rick Spielman, the GM of the Vikings, we can talk off the air about things that he wouldn't say on the air. And that comes with FaceTime, and it makes you more comfortable when you're talking about these guys during the year because you know what they're going through, and sometimes you can reach out to them just to see how they're doing.
So can you explain how it was without going to the training camp this year? Because you said this was the first year that you haven't done it in a while. So did that affect your way? You kind of weren't able to get the experiences and talk to these guys while watching them?
Well, we did a little of it. We did some of it on Zoom. It was challenging. Like, when you're there, everything's so much more accessible, and you're at practice and you're talking to guys as they're, coming off the field, and it's just a more comfort level. You're a familiar thing. When you're doing things on Zoom, and we got, we talked with Aaron this year and we talked with Matt LaFleur, but instead of 20 guests at Green Bay camp, we had maybe 5. Mm-hmm. The problem with Zoom is that it's almost like the guys know they have to do it. They have to check a box. So they're on from 10 to 10:15 and they're watching a clock and they're distracted because they have their phone in their hands. It's a completely different experience. So you do get a little of the FaceTime. The guys that you built up a relationship with over the years, that was easy. But the guys that you were interviewing for the first time, it's completely different. Even though you're technically face-to-face, you're not getting that same level of comfort. So there was a different feel to it.
All right. So before we transition into some pure NFL talk, I just want to ask one more question. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to get into radio that are going to be trying to enter an industry that might that is considered by many to be not as popular as TV?
Yeah, my recommendation, and I get asked this a lot, is simply this. If it's what you want to do, because I know that parents will be very tough when they say, it's tough to get a job. How are you going to make money? I lived with the same set of parents. My mom wanted me to become a lawyer. I said, this is what I want to do. And she goes, all right, we'll help you pay your rent if you need to. If you love it, don't give up until you get the opportunity. You may find you do it for 5 years and you go, yeah, it's not for me. Go do something else. But don't go do something and then regret not trying it, no matter how long it takes. And the other thing is, and you guys are doing it right now, I say this to everybody, get your reps. You're going to keep these. I don't know if you're going to keep these tapes, whatever it is, but whatever you keep from what you do now, you're going to listen back in 15 years and go, man, was I bad? Because I listen back to the stuff I did when I was in college. I listen back to the stuff I did when I was 10 years out of college. I listened to stuff that I did 10 years ago. You're always getting better when you get reps. You're always going to get better. I would tell kids, I don't care if you have to do a talk show in your room without an audience. Do it. Wake up on Monday and do a talk show based on what you saw on Sunday if you're a football fan. Talk, and don't do it in your head, by the way. Talk out loud. Because you just get better by doing it. I've seen people. I worked at a TV station in Washington for a number of years, and I'm not going to mention who it was, but they brought in somebody who was not qualified to be on the air. It was a woman. I'm not going to lie, and I'm going to be honest. She was in because she was an attractive woman. She couldn't pronounce names. She had no idea what was going on. She got the job, and I'm just going to tell you, 5 years later, she was a very qualified broadcaster because she was passionate about it, and she got reps. And she wasn't ready to start. And, that can be frustrating when there are more qualified people. But just by doing it, she got better. And she became a very good broadcaster. So you just got to do it. You got to throw the headsets on. You got to sit in front of a microphone. And you've got to get reps. And it's going to make you better. And save this stuff because, believe me, you think you're good now. In 5 years, you're going to be far better. And 5 years after that, you're going to be even better than that. Trust me when I tell you that.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's going to transition us to some just NFL talk, where obviously you're an NFL talk show host where we want to hear some opinions because we talk Giants, NFL all the time on the show. First question, who's winning the NFC East?
Well, I picked Washington about 4 weeks ago, believe it or not. And it was based on how different they looked with Alex Smith at quarterback. Now, he's, of course, got an injured calf again, so we don't know how many games he's going to play for the rest of the season. Won't be this week. So, but it was based on two things. It was seeing what the Eagles were with Carson Wentz. Now they look different with Jalen Hurts, so we may have to bring them back into the equation. But their hole was so big, it was going to be hard to dig out of. The Cowboys seemed to be a complete mess, but they had a favorable schedule. But I looked at three things. I looked at the way the Giants were playing, but I also looked at their schedule, which was not going to be easy. Of course, they've got Cleveland this week. I looked at Washington's schedule. They only had 2 tough games left, and Dallas's schedule only 1 tough game left. For me, it came down to Dallas and Washington, but Dallas just seemed to be a team that can't get out of its own way, and defensively, they've got major issues. So I said, look, Washington's got a defense that can win them football games. They've got a head coach that can kind of handle this situation, and I think they've got a professional quarterback back under center in Alex Smith. I thought it would be Washington, and I still think it'll be Washington, even if Alex Smith is hurt again.
So now what do you think about the Giants? Because the Giants, I don't think that personally, we're both huge Giants fans. I don't think they're going to win the division at this point because of just everything that's going on. What's the next step the Giants have to take? Is Daniel Jones that guy? Because you understand now that when he's not able to run the football, people know that he's a sitting duck really in the pocket, and he can't really throw the football when he doesn't have the option to run. So what's next for Daniel Jones and the Giants? Because the defense is obviously there. They're an evolving defense week in and week out. They get better and better. But what do they need to do in this offseason? Because it doesn't seem like their playoff hopes are very likely right now.
Well, I think it's funny because, you guys said earlier, we were talking off the air, I think, about, or maybe on the air about Daniel Jones. And 1 week he's a franchise quarterback. The next week we got to draft the quarterback. That's fans. I always say, listen, you don't have to make a decision until after week 17. They're not drafting a quarterback in November.
Of course.
They're not drafting a quarterback in December. Let's see what happens after week 17. I think we're far enough into this for me to say this. And this is not a place you want to be. I still think the jury is out on Daniel Jones. That being said, I believe he will be a good enough quarterback for this football team.
Mhm.
I've seen enough in him to make me believe. Now, as you said, look, if he's not healthy, he's not as dynamic as he could be, and he's not a one-dimensional guy. I think he can sit in the pocket and throw the football, but he's not going to be nearly as good if he doesn't have that element of running.
Yeah.
Would Lamar Jackson be as good if he had a bad hamstring? Of course not. And he can throw the football pretty effectively. So I think you need him healthy. But he's got an NFL arm. He's a smart guy. He's a tough guy. We saw that by him going out there and playing with the hamstring. I don't have any problem with the Giants entering 2021 with him as their quarterback. Understanding that, look, in year 3, you've got to take that next step, or we're having that conversation as we are with Mitchell Trubisky in Chicago. I think Daniel Jones is better than Trubisky, by the way. I'm not trying to lump them together, but I'm not worried about Daniel Jones right now. But I was talking about Daniel Jones when I said, 1 week he's a franchise quarterback, the next week we need a new quarterback. People feel that way about their general manager, Dave Gettleman. Oh,
he's a good free agency. Very good free agency.
He's always drafted very well too. I mean, look at the guys he's put together. The defense is so good right now.
And I agree with you guys, but let's be fair. Beginning of the season, when Jones was struggling and Andrew Thomas was struggling, I listened to people say he can't draft. Look, he blew it. He blew it on Andrew Thomas. He blew it on Daniel Jones. Meantime, both are playing reasonably well now, and all of a sudden he looks good. His middle to late round picks on the defensive side of the football, as you said,
incredible,
have been exceptional. And the team started winning football games. I think this team in the offseason needs to address 2 things. They need to get a number 1 wide receiver. I think if you slide everybody back one spot, you've got a good group, and they need to get somebody on the edge because, you can go out and get Marcus Golden, of course, is now in Arizona. You can bring in a guy like Fackrell. All that's great. They've got to figure out what they're going to do with Leonard Williams, which, could be another franchise tag situation. But I think you've got to get an edge rusher. In this league, you've got 3 positions that have to be addressed. You need a quarterback, you need a left tackle, you need an edge rusher. And I'm not sure it's that order. I think quarterback's number 1. Some GMs would say, give me an edge guy. Some would say, give me a left tackle. I think they've got the quarterback and the left tackle now. I think we're seeing progress in Andrew Thomas. I think they've got to get a wide receiver and an edge rusher. Give Joe Judge an off season. Who knows if we'll have that, by the way. Remember, Daniel Jones has only had 1 off season. And you may say, well, look at Justin Herbert, look at Joe Burrow. I get it. They're doing things that make it hard to accept a guy that's not at that level that quickly. But I think there's a good foundation for this football team going forward.
It's really funny because after the Giants beat Seattle and Washington was playing Monday against Pittsburgh, and if the Pittsburgh had won that game, the Giants would be sitting very pretty. And if you asked me then, I would say, easily the Giants are going to the playoffs. But now they have this Cleveland game where their best defender, James Bradbury, is out because he was in close contact with somebody. And now Darnay Holmes, their impressive 4th-round corner, he's out too.
Jason Garrett as well.
Yeah, exactly. Freddie Kitchens is calling the plays. Your quarterback situation's up in the air. It's crazy how, with a snap of a finger, things can change that quickly.
I know some Giants fans are happy that Jason Garrett's out. I'm not one of them, by the way. I happen to like Jason Garrett. I think he's smart.
I do too.
But, listen, I fall into the same trap that you do. We don't have a choice when you're in broadcasting. We look at schedules. But it's a trap game. I can give you 1,000. The Raiders a couple of weeks ago were going to make the playoffs. They had a favorable schedule. They almost lost to the Jets.
Mm-hmm.
And then they did lose to the Falcons. And then they did lose to the Chargers. So we look and go, well, they should win this game. The Minnesota Vikings, after that tough start, well, look at their schedule. They're going to make it. Then they lost to the Dallas Cowboys. So the schedule game is a dangerous one to play. Jemmer, you were just talking about the Giants have this game and Washington has Pittsburgh. And then you wake up and you realize, things this is a league that any given Sunday cliche actually applies to this league. You can do it and you can come close, but there are always going to be things that you analyze incorrectly. And that's why picking games is the thing that cracks me up more than anything. People ask us to do it. We do it every week on the show. I put it on Twitter and then people go, you're an idiot. You picked it. You're an idiot. Brady and I will disagree on games. And sometimes the game is decided like on a Hail Mary. Like if I picked Buffalo and Brady picked Arizona, was he right because the Hail Mary was executed? Like the Buffalo should have won the game. Picking games in this league is as crazy as anything. We do it because we have to, but it's always it's an exercise of folly is what I find out. And everybody says, who's going to win? And I go, don't ask me. Ask my son. He's got a better chance of being right.
No, you're 100% right. And it's almost like that applies to fantasy football too, because at the end of the day, you can only put in your best guys. And I mean, yes, you can look at matchups and this and that. If a cornerback's injured and he's got to get the second string guarding him. But at the end of the day, you don't know how many times he's going to be this guy's going to be targeted, this and that. And you talked about the Raiders. At one point, they were 6-3, and now they've lost they're 1-4 in their last 5 weeks, right. And they lost to the Jets. I mean, they beat the Jets, excuse me, and that was their only win. So realistically, this team should be 0-5 in the last 5 games. It's just incredible how tables turn like that. And yeah, the tables have turned, unfortunately, not in the Giants' way.
Well, I'll tell you 2 things. One is we do something on NFL radio called the SiruisXM Tailgate Show, which is a lead up to the games. And I've had to host it a couple of times this week. And part of that pregame show, we bring in a fantasy expert to give us advice. And twice I had issues with my tight end. And I can't remember who he told me to start in those 2 weeks, but I sat the guys he told me to, started the guys he told me to. The guys I had scored like 30 points. The guys he told me to start had no points. And I'm like, and this is the fantasy expert. That's why I don't give out fantasy advice. And I'll tell you something else. I never forgot this. When I was working with Bill Parcells, I said, Bill, at the end of the show, let's pick games for the weekend. And he goes, I don't pick games. And I said, well, why not? And he said, I'll tell you why not. Because I know what this team does well. I know what that team does well. I don't know which team's going to be able to do it. So to try to figure out who's going to win when you see the guys on TV, oh, the running game is against the worst defense. How about Cleveland and Tennessee? Oh, they're both going to run the ball down each other's throats. Meantime, Derrick Henry goes nowhere, and they're throwing the ball all over the place. Everything you think you know. You guys are Giants fans, right?
Yes.
How well have you looked up the first Super Bowl when they beat the Broncos?
All I know is Phil Simms was the guy.
Yeah.
Okay, so they were a dominant running team with Joe Morris and the offensive line, which was as good as any in football. They're going to run it down their throats. They came out and they started throwing it. Because, everything we think we know and everything we want to say we know is never what we know, which is why picking football games is as crazy as it sounds.
Oh, yeah. And the fact that you say the fantasy expert, my dad and I will watch like some pregame NFL countdown, and they'll be like, this is the guy you take in DraftKings. This is your FanDuel pick. And my dad's like, why are you saying that? Everyone that comes onto the show, they say this guy's going to score a touchdown. They say this guy's going to be good. How would you know that that's going to happen? Like, and it's completely on the same page as you. Completely.
Yeah, you just don't. And that's why I say, people think you're experts. Your expertise ends with your knowledge of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Your expertise ends with knowing as Bill Parcells said, you know what they do well. You know who their good players are. But if anybody thinks you know what's going to happen on the weekend, you don't. Trust me. So I laugh when people ask me, and I say, ask my wife. She's got a better chance of being. I'll pass the buck to just about anybody when it comes to that, especially when it comes to gambling, by the way. Like my dad would say, oh, he wants to put a bet on the game. I'm like, please do not get me involved in that.
So my next question is, obviously, okay, I talk a lot of smack with the Giants and I like to have fun with it, but something that really gets on my nerves is when Jets fans think they know the answer to everything and that every year their franchise is going to be going to the playoffs, everything's fixed automatically. And something that really annoys me is when they say, oh, Trevor Lawrence is going to fix everything. And that's something I really disagree with. I think he's not even the right guy in terms of he's going to make them a functional team again. Is Trevor Lawrence going to make them respectable?
Well, I will say this, first of all, it's a tricky question. Trevor Lawrence, to me, from the guys I've talked to, the guys who evaluate this position, and I work with some of them. I work with Brady Quinn, who evaluates the draft with me every year. I work with Bruce Gradkowski, who evaluates the quarterbacks for Pro Football Focus. Trevor Lawrence is arguably the best prospect to come into this league since before Andrew Luck, by the way. That includes Andrew Luck. So consider that for a second. Andrew Luck came in and was as good as advertised, and these guys think that Trevor Lawrence could be better. Now, the problem with the Jets is that, and you guys know this, people think it starts with the quarterback or the coach or the general manager. It starts with ownership. I worked with Rich Gannon, who took the Oakland Raiders to a Super Bowl, and we were talked oftentimes about what was going on in Oakland, and he would say, sometimes you really need a special group to overcome, some of the mistakes that are made with ownership. And the Jets are ownership challenged. They can't seem to get out of their own way. I can't explain why, because it's not like Dan Snyder. It's not like a team that likes to get involved in the day-to-day decisions. They've just made bad decisions in hiring. I like their general manager, by the way. I do like Joe Douglas. I know guys that I have friends that work for him. I know guys that knew him in Baltimore. So I respect Joe Douglas. I think they've got to hire the right coach. Adam Gase will not be that guy. But if you're a Giants fan and you don't want the Jets to succeed, it would worry me a little if they got Trevor Lawrence. Because, look, the Indianapolis Colts were a complete mess before they drafted Peyton Manning. They became a perennial playoff team and won Super Bowls. I'm not saying that's what Trevor Lawrence will be. But a quarterback can change the quarterback changes everything. Here's another thing Bill Parcells taught me. In this league, your window to win is 4 years, unless you have one of those guys, and then it's doubled or tripled. And when you think about Aaron Rodgers, when you think about Drew Brees, when you think about Brady, it's not just those guys, but that evens the play. When you step on the field and you have the best player on the field at that position, you've got a good chance to win on Sundays.
I'll never forget, I did the radio station at my high school. And I remember specifically the day that the starting quarterback for Clemson got injured and they brought in Trevor Lawrence, the freshman. And we were talking about it and we were like, oh, well, I looked into the guy a little bit. I'm like, he should be good. I mean, they're starting him he's a true freshman starting at Clemson on this Saturday. And they never looked back. He's lost one game he started in, and that was the national championship. And you're 100% right. It's one of the most looked at prospects in all of football. He probably could have came up after his freshman year and probably had success in the NFL. I remember Stephen A. Smith was making the argument that everyone they need to let the rule go by that he should not be able to play 2 more years in college, because why risk this guy's legs after you know what he's capable of? And now he's just been proving it week in and week out. They probably would definitely not have lost to Notre Dame if he was on the field without COVID. And
you don't know that.
Yeah.
Well, and by the way, their quarterback that came in is pretty good himself. Mm-hmm. They seem to recruit pretty well at Clemson. Dabo Swinney does a great job. But listen, Jeremy, I understand. I know Jets fans. I've lived around them. I also know New York fans, by the way.
New York fans
I can be a delusional Knicks fan.
And let me say this about New York fans, because I've done some podcasts myself, which won't be listened to as much as this one. But I did a podcast with Linda Cohen from ESPN, and she grew up a big Rangers fan. I'm an Islanders fan. And I said, here's what I know about New York fans. New York fans have 2 favorite teams in any sport. So for me, I'm an Islanders fan. The Islanders were my favorite team. My second favorite team was anybody playing the Rangers.
Oh, yeah.
When you're a Giants fan, you like the Giants and anybody playing the Jets. That's just what it is to be a New York fan. Anybody who's a New York fan, and I hope this isn't you, Ethan, that go, I like both. It's not possible.
There is someone we know.
We know someone, and Jeremy gives him a hard time.
Then you can tell him they're not New York fans.
I give him the hardest time in the world for it. Trust me.
It's impossible to like both teams, because New York is so passionate about their sports that if you like both, you're a psychopath.
Yeah, it is impossible to like both. If you like them both, you're not a fan. Here's a story. I'm a Yankees fan. You guys Mets fans or Yankees fans?
I'm a Yankee fan.
I'm a huge Mets fan. He's a huge Yankee fan.
And you know my father's a big Mets fan.
Yeah. Oh, I know that. Yeah. So I'm a huge Yankees fan. And this will tell you exactly how passionate I was about liking the Yankees and hating the Mets. In 1986, the Red Sox, a team that is impossible to like if you're a Yankees fan, was playing the Mets in the World Series. Yeah. I was at a friend's apartment when they were about to win the World Series. And in my gut, I was rooting for the Red Sox because I didn't live in Boston.
I didn't
know any Red Sox fans. I knew I was going to be surrounded by my Mets fans friends. I was rooting for the Red Sox. And before the game ended, I had to leave the apartment. I couldn't be around them when they won.
Wow.
So that'll tell you how much I hated the Mets at the time, that I was willing to root for the Boston Red Sox because I couldn't stand to be around the Mets fans.
Wow.
As a Mets fan, I used to hate the Yankees, and I more or less don't like specific Yankees fans more than the actual Yankees, because Yankees fans just are going to rub it in my face completely. But I have to say, I do not like watching the Yankees win, but the Yankees fans would probably make me more angry than talking about it than actually watching. Because at the end of the day, I don't mind watching the Yankees. I like actually analyzing, because baseball is like my favorite sport. So I will watch it. I played it all my life and I don't mind watching it regardless. But so as we wrap up the interview, we talked about football for majority. I know we just got on a little baseball tangent, but finally, the basic question around the NFL: who's winning the NFC and who's winning the NFC? AFC and NFC.
We just got through saying I don't make predictions. Now you're asking me to make predictions.
We got to ask.
Well, I would say this. The AFC, I think, is easy. I don't know how anybody beats the Kansas City Chiefs. I really don't.
I don't know if anyone across
I don't know how the Raiders almost did it twice.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? I mean, here's the Raiders that aren't going to make the playoffs, and they almost did it twice. They are fascinating to watch. I mean, they are fat. Again, I work with Brett Favre on a weekly basis, who set almost every NFL record while he was playing. And Pat Mahomes is going to break all of them in like 4 years.
I mean,
it's fascinating. First of all, the game has changed. We know that even from when he was playing. I'll give you an example, and we'll wrap it up. But we had Justin Herbert on this week.
Oh, wow.
So Justin Herbert, I think, has had 6 or 7 300-yard games now. And we started getting into the – first of all, Brett Favre had 1 in his first 2 years. 1. Wow. I should have asked you guys that question. How many 300-yard games did he have in his first 2 years? 1. Okay. His first 2 years, he threw 18 touchdown passes and 19 touchdown passes. Didn't eclipse 20 until his 3rd year. This is one of the top 100 players of all time. And Justin Herbert's done all of that in his rookie season. But if I said to you, how many guys in their first 6 games, in their first 16 games, have had 6 300-yard games, how many guys do you think have done it?
I would probably say 2 or 3.
That's pretty good. Jeremy, what would you say?
I was going to say a lot more than that.
Yeah. My instinct was more than that too, by the way, considering Burrow and Herbert. Burrow hasn't done it yet, but, he's now hurt. He'll do it in his first 16. Herbert's done it. Only Andrew Luck and Pat Mahomes.
I was going to say Pat Mahomes, and I was trying to think about the other one.
Right. And Pat Mahomes doesn't really pop into your mind immediately because he didn't start as a rookie. But what he's doing, it's almost absurd. And there's nothing that drives me crazier than when people that call my show and go, defense and running wins championships. And I say, you got to get out of the 70s. Okay. Offense wins championships.
It really is. It's just a total different time.
Totally. Here's what you need. You need a great quarterback, and you need a defense that's good enough. And 2 years ago, Kansas City's defense wasn't good enough. Now it's good enough. Okay. With Clark and Jones and Matthew and all those guys. So I don't see how anybody beats Kansas City. The only way you beat Kansas City is if you play your best game and they don't play their best game. Could happen, but it takes a lot. The NFC, I think, is a little more challenging. Look, a healthy Drew Brees, I still think the Saints have the best team from top to bottom. Defensively, they have balance on offense. But if they have to go to Lambeau Field, even without fans in the month of January, that's a tricky place to play. Those are the 2 best teams in the NFC. So I'm going to stick with the Saints because they were my preseason pick, but it's one of those 2. But I'll say the Saints right now.
And before we wrap up, I'm just going to back up your point where you need an offense that's good and a defense that's good enough, because you saw that with the Giants in their first year under Ben McAdoo. They had a top 5 defense, I think, ranked in the league on Pro Football Focus, but their offense couldn't do anything. You saw that in the Green Bay game in the playoffs. They dropped, you can argue about the boat trip or whatever you want, but they were dropping passes. They couldn't keep up with Rodgers and that high-powered offense. And once the defense started to get fatigued, like you see this season, if the defense gets fatigued and the offense can't do anything, then you're not going to win a football game. Then you have major problems.
Well, and anybody that talks to you about football and says defense wins championships, if they ever say that to you, ask them how many times a team wins without either a Hall of Fame quarterback or a quarterback that had a Hall of Fame season. Okay? Because the ones that win without them are the outliers. Pat Mahomes is a Hall of Famer. I'm saying that now. He's 4 years into his career.
As soon as he won the Super Bowl MVP.
Right. But, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, when Philadelphia won, that was the outlier. But, the Falcons went to the Super Bowl. Matt Ryan was the MVP that year. Russell Wilson, Joe Flacco, the year they went, he's not a Hall of Famer, but he had a Hall of Fame type season. Eli Manning is in that conversation. Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees. Look back at it. When everybody says, what about the Baltimore Ravens with Trent Dilfer? That's the outlier to the conversation. Tampa Bay with Brad Johnson, those are few and far between. You want to win in this league, you better have a quarterback that plays at a Hall of Fame level or is a Hall of Famer. Offense wins championships in the NFL. I stand by that statement.
Without a doubt. And when you look at a team that can beat the Chiefs, it's who can keep up with the Chiefs offensively, because if you're going to beat the Chiefs, it's going to be a shootout regardless, because this team will toss touchdown on touchdown on touchdown, and it's almost impossible to stop that because of the weapons that they have. They've been able to use Robinson and Watkins more down the field, opening up Kelsey, and Kelsey's been getting 2 games in a row, 8 catches, 136 and a touchdown. It's just like, what team can keep up offensively? And it's almost hard to believe that there's any team that can do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very short list. I would put like 4 or 5 on the list that, first of all, 2 things. I think if you're going to play Kansas City, you have to have John Harbaugh's approach, which is we've got to ignore the old rules of 4th and 2, we're going to punt. You got to score on almost every possession. You've got to take risks. Harbaugh did that in the times that they played him. I don't care if you're your own 45 early in a football game. you're not going to stop them on half their drive. So you got to be aggressive. But, look, I'm not saying these teams will beat them, but, teams whose offenses impress me, Buffalo's does, the way Josh Allen's playing with that wide receiver group. I think Pittsburgh has the capability to do it.
All right, now.
I said the Saints. I said the Green Bay Packers. It's an offensive league this year. The defensive numbers are off the charts bad. And so there are a lot of teams that can score, but, again, you better not turn the football over. A couple of weeks ago, Kansas City lost the turnover about a 4-1 against Miami, won the game easily. I know the score at the end was close, but it was 30-10 in that football game. They lost the turnover about a 4-1. So you better not turn the football over. You better win that battle, and you better score a lot, and you better be willing to go for it in times that make you really uncomfortable, because that's what they do to you.
All right. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We appreciate your time, and have a great football Sunday coming up.
Well, thank you very much. You guys too. Very happy to be here.
All right. This has been Under Review episode 16. We'll catch you in the next one.